Good afternoon. Today we are coming to the most interesting part belonging to the text Amar jibon or my life as it is translated by Rashundari Devi. We have already known how she has been the first ever female autobiography writer in colonial Bengal. We have also known how in the previous chapters she has referred to her childhood, her joys and sorrows, and especially the way she got married. She had to come from her own village, her own paternal home, to the family of the in-laws, and how this kind of uprootedness, this kind of displacement saddened her in the core of her heart, and how all the time she felt depressed or she felt sad. She was about to resort to some kind of divine intervention. She was on the one hand very much grown up, born and brought up in the traditional manner of any Bengali Hindu girl in those days. She learned to believe in God, the Almighty, but at the same time, she had an unconscious, almost hidden desire to learn something. She has described the same spirit while learning the household work. She did not know, up to a certain age, she did not know how to do the household works. But first, in order to help a khurima, a relative, an aunt, to help her because she was so much ill, she learned to do the household works. And then again, when she came to the in-laws' house, initially her mother-in-law was a kind-hearted lady and she did not let her much to do. But when that lady fell ill and lost her eyesight, she had to take up the responsibility of running the whole household. So she describes in the same manner the way she has learned the household works, the way she has made herself mature enough to control the household works and behave as a good daughter-in-law, a traditional, competent, efficient daughter-in-law in a traditional family. It is in the same manner she describes how her desire to learn to read and write developed, that again from a very traditional religious and spiritual zeal, that she will read the religious books. She is not thinking of going out. She is not thinking of professionally using her educational exercise in any way. That was not even possible to think in those days. But she is willing to read books for the pleasure of an ethically permissible innovative but traditional, yet pragmatic. Now, how did she incorporate within herself so much experience and knowledge that how to write, how to make it acceptable, how a female author's writing can be understood as acceptable within the patriarchal norms? All these things somehow were functioning in her subconscious or at the unconscious level, we may say. And this is as wonderful as the task of learning to read and write by herself. You simply can wonder at the talent of the lady, the inherent merit of the lady who could accomplish this without any help of any teacher, because that was not possible. Girls were not allowed to study in those days. Let me skip and coming to the next section. One day I dreamt that I was reading the Chaitanya Bhagavat. When I woke up, I felt enthralled. I closed my eyes to look for the same. It seemed that I was already in possession of something precious. My body and my mind swelled with satisfaction. It was so strange. I had never seen the book, yet I had been reading it in my dream. For an illiterate person like me, it would have been absolutely impossible to read such a difficult book. Chaitanya Bhagavat is a famous hagiographical text based on the life of Mahaprabhu Sri Chaitanya. Very common, very popular text for the Vaishnava families in Bengal. Every Vaishnava family or people believing in the Vaishnava tradition in rural Bengal in those days used to keep such texts like Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavat, Chaitanya Mangal. Such texts were available very easily in any well-to-do middle class or middle class family in rural Bengal in those days. But she had never seen that book before. First, it was a kind of abstract desire that if I could learn to read, I could read religious texts. It was a kind of abstract desire, not specified. Now suddenly one day she had this dream. It was a specific reference to a particular text. So, whether we can understand this as the grace of God, she was really so much devoted to God, she was so religious minded that we can't have the daring desire to contradict her belief. We have no right to contradict her own belief. Perhaps for her it was her God's will that she will start reading, she will have the process of enlightenment starting with this text, Chaitanya Bhagavat. So the text of Chaitanya Bhagavat itself, being a religious text, has also come to become historical, especially in the context of writing narratives, writing autobiographies by women authors in the 19th century. So the text here does not only remain a religious text, it has become something else if we understand it in the tradition of women's writing. The Russian lady was one of the pioneers of that. Let's again come back to the text. She had this vision between that she was reading Chaitanya Bhagavat, and when she woke up, a strange feeling of enthrallment overpowered her. How was it possible? She thought, I don't problem for our modern or postmodern understanding. Finally, to penetrate it, how was it possible? She prayed to God again, saying, "You are the friend of the poor, allow me to recognize the book." So she resorted to her prayers to God, the ultimate faith-oriented praying to her Daya Madhav. And how strange are the ways of God and the effects of His kindness. He heard my prayers and set out to grant me my wish. My eldest son was then 8. I was working in the kitchen one day when my husband came in and said to him, "Bibin, I am leaving my Chaitanya Bhagavat here. Please bring it over when I ask you to." So another very strange incident. She was working in the kitchen. Her eldest son was 8 years old by then. One day, suddenly her husband came in the room and said to the son that I am keeping this particular book, Chaitanya Bhagavat, here. Now this was like a revelation to her. Pleased with myself, I said to God, "You have granted my wish," and I picked the book up. In those days, books were made differently. There were illustrated wooden frames to hold the sheets, like the puthi. 2 wooden frames, and the leaves were contained within that wooden structure. Books were kept in that manner. So here we also have a reference to the culture of what we call book history, how the books were made in those days. She's, as a passing reference, giving us a glimpse of that also, how books were made in those days. And this was like a sudden epiphany. This was like a revelation. Was it enabled by her extreme faith in God, or it was just a coincidence that her husband suddenly one day came back at this time and asked the son to pick up the book, keep it in a safe place? We can't really determine it, but at least we can try to interpret it as someone's desire. If you are willing for something, if you are going to undertake a positive cause, if you are sincere about your will, there must be some means of doing that. So we can interpret it as a kind of faith in God according to the writer herself, or in a modernist way, in a secular way, we can also view it as one's success in granting herself the desire by some external forces, by some external conditions which are favorable to those who are positively willing to do something. So it was a grace of her willpower, maybe. We don't know what it is really. When the book was brought into the room, I detached one sheet and hid it. So you see, the book was not this binded kind of stuff as we use it now. Leaves were kept loosely inside the wooden write an autobiography of her own in the language Bengali. Let's come back to the text. Where should I keep it so that nobody would find it? So she was concerned about that, how to conceal the page. But if they did, what would they say? So the constant fear of criticism was there. Finally, she kept it inside the khori in the kitchen. That was the only hiding place. If you have seen older system kitchens, there was a sort of small chamber called khori, inside which the ladies of the house had kept some important things. So that was a private space. Women's condition in 19th century Bengali, colonial Bengal, always gives this kind of attentional exchange between the public and the private. So the kitchen sink, the bedroom, here a particular place called khori, khupri, hulungi. So these kinds of things can be understood as the possibilities of creating a personal space for women, to whom no privacy in the modern sense was allowed in those times. However, she kept it inside the khori in the kitchen. Housework kept me busy the whole day. There was no time even to look at it. In the evening, the cooking continued until it was very late. And she was so much busy in doing the household work for the whole family that it was not possible that she would get much time to try and read the leaf herself. So gradually she began to lose hope. And again, whenever she felt depressed, whenever she felt there is no hope at all, there was no hope, she prayed to God constantly. Please God, teach me how to read. If you don't, who else will? That was my constant prayer. So once again, we get to see that she has given herself completely, she has submitted herself completely to the will of God. But in a different sense, in a secular sense, we can say that it is at the same time her submission to her inner willpower. And if we try to interpret it, our inner power, our inner spiritual moral strength, that is what we can understand as the grace of God, the filling of God in the living human existence. Now let's come back again to the text. The very next moment I thought, of course I will. God has given me hope. So she was getting depressed. Where is the time to learn to read? After doing so much household work, it was hardly possible for her to find any free time. But then again, she hoped against hope that God has given me this dream, God has sent me this dream. In a sense, she's almost like some epic heroine. In epic heroes and heroines' lives, we have seen that some divine entity, God, some spiritual entity, some oracle, some divine intervention is necessary to give some message. And that message is sometimes a prophetic revelation, sometimes it is a kind of warning, but that shapes the journey of a kind of epic hero or epic heroine in certain ways. Now, Sundari Devi is a very humble, simple, ordinary lady belonging to a colonial, traditional Bengali Hindu family. But look at her gesture. She is invoking God's aid, almost like an epic gesture, before undertaking such a great job of learning to read and write without the help of any human instructor, any physical instructor, any teacher. So what happens after that? Her will is granted. I decided to steal one of the palm leaves on which my eldest son used to Re-invoking that memory, she is comparing the sound memory of the words and the written form of the letters. In this way, she is teaching herself. Now, studying in classrooms or even studying online, nowadays having printed books, having PDF copies, having e-books, Kindle edition, so much today. It is really unbelievable for us. What great endeavor was taken by this lady in order to teach herself in this way. How strenuous was the process, but in the end, it was really fruitful. It was really wonderful. So, one look at the leaf, another at the sheet. A comparison with the letters I already knew. And finally, a verification with the speech of others. That was the process I adapted for some time. Furtively, I would take out the sheet and put it back promptly before anybody could see it. She adopted unknowingly a method which even nowadays can be used for treating completely illiterate persons. Comparing the sound effect of the word with the written form. So nowadays this has developed into a very well constructed scientific system of making someone learn to read and write. We have so many instances of language teaching using e-classroom. It is the same. Using the headphone, using the earphone, we can get to hear the pronunciation. This is British pronunciation, this is American pronunciation, and then comparing it with the letters. What has now been modernized as a process of effective language teaching. She did that completely at her own will, completely as part of her experimental procedure of self-learning. And in this way, she was finally able to win the quiz. She became what she calls Jita. Wasn't it a matter to be regretted that I had to go through all this humiliation just because I was a woman? Now comes the question. We have seen repeatedly throughout the book that she is never complaining particularly against anybody. Sometimes she is just making some stray comments about the system. Well, the old system was so conservative, girls were not allowed to study in those days. What a regretful matter. So, a general way of not complaining but expressing her misgivings, expressing a kind of sadness about the orthodox old system of conservatism. But here, ultimately here, she puts a question. I had to go through all this humiliation just because I was a woman. So here she is putting a question which is ontological, which is identity oriented, which is self-expressional, which is subjective for every woman. Am I to suffer this because I am a woman? Because I was born a woman? Was this kind of strange labor, undue labor was due to me? Couldn't I have the basic opportunities of learning to read and write with a teacher, with a book, at least having the simple basic arrangements just as the boys have? Nowadays we are having this. We have come across a long way, long decades, long centuries after that. And nowadays, in co-ed schools, also in girls' schools or boys' schools, the same method of classroom teaching, even in the case of e-learning modules, the same thing can be accessed by both boys and girls. At least nowadays we have achieved that. But in those days, when there was no possibility for a woman even to express a desire for learning, it was an unbelievable sort of task. It was an unbelievable sort of quest And in this way, she taught herself how to read.